Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations.
Episode 234, Dancing with the Difficult. In the last episode, I talked about how to notice and take action on opportunities and possibilities. And many of you will know that's easier said than done. There are decisions to be made and sometimes conversations to be had before action can be taken. There may be times, a bit like me leaving behind 30 years of ways of working, the opportunities and possibilities you identify might involve you leaving behind people and things you're not yet ready to desert. In times like these, I liken it to dancing with the difficult, be they decisions, choices, conversations or people. And like dancing with an inexperienced partner, they may not know all of the steps. Some toes may get trodden on, and it can be unclear who the leader is. So in this episode, I'll be dusting off my dancing shoes and sashaying around the ballroom to the dulcet tones of negotiation, assertiveness, compassion, and self-leadership. Take your partners and 1, 2, 3. We know that many introverts are overthinkers, but not all. So I prefer to resist making grand statements about how introverts make decisions because we are all so different and the context matters. I decided a useful way to illustrate this might be to share my lived experience of dealing with the difficult and through case studies of clients that I've worked with. Chances are, somewhere in these, you will find something that relates to you or someone you know, and my hope is that you will experience a few aha moments that increase understanding and tolerance. I'll be looking at this through the lens of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, not because it presents an absolute truth, indeed it is often refuted, but because it offers a useful framework on which to hang these ideas about, in this case, decision-making. Isabel Briggs Myers, in her book Gifts Differing, talks about thinking and feeling as being rival instruments of a decision. I certainly know that I have felt the tension between them when faced with a difficult decision. My heart says one thing and my head another. Which do I go with? But here's the thing. Both are relevant and necessary. The art is being able to use the right one in the right moment. Our cognitive processes, the thinking, tends to have us operate on a true-false, right-wrong, yes-no dichotomy. This process requires us to gather data and facts in a rather impersonal way that enables the decision-making to make logical sense. Basing decisions on feelings, on the other hand, lacks concrete data that can be shared in a graph or a logic chart. This is a better type of decision-making when handling people-related decisions, although in my book, I struggle to think of a decision that doesn't have human consequences. Maybe that says something about my preferred decision process, though. Because we each have our preferences, so it's not that one process is right and the other is wrong, but knowing which is required in each situation is an important leadership, social and human skill. The qualities associated with the feeling type decision makers are being tender-hearted, tactful and empathic. The qualities of the thinking decision making types are logical, rational and relatively unemotional. You can see now why we need a degree of competence in both, and our preferences are probably going to determine which gets used and in what order. As someone with a preference for feeling, I go there first and then check out the supporting evidence to finalise my decision. Again, sometimes easier said than done. People often wrongly assume that HR professionals should be feeling-type decision makers. From the clients I work with, I can tell you that they need to be able to make really tough decisions based on facts and not emotions. Evidence shows that thinkers are at their best with the impersonal and feelers when bridging or connecting individuals. Throughout my lifetime, I've been presented with opportunities to dance with the difficult many times. And yes, I choose that term over faced difficulties or had to make decisions. I am at the helm, or the DJ and the choreographer of my life. I chose to leave school early when I was not thriving. Not easy, given that both my parents were teachers. And I'm really not joking when I say that I'm a late developer. I chose to leave my abusive first marriage when it was clear that neither of us would flourish together. Apart, maybe. Together, no. I chose to leave my pretty cushy employment when I realised that I was selling my soul and compromising my values. No amount of money or pension or benefits was worth that to me. I chose to walk away from an associate position with an international training organisation when I realised I'd been pretending to be more extroverted in order to fit in and get on. I left that decision a little longer than I should have, so burnout gave me an unmistakable nudge. I chose to restructure my business when I realised that I wanted to spend more time rattling cages and focusing on enabling introverts to live their best life. But this isn't all about me. I promised you some case studies, so let's start with Amanda. Names, of course, have been changed to protect my clients' identities. Amanda was faced with a huge life decision, one familiar to many women of her age. To stay in a relationship that was no longer serving either of them, or to leave. But that's not all. At the same time, Amanda was considering whether to change her career as it didn't light her up anymore. That's two huge changes, and it's not uncommon for them to surface at the same time. Many midlife women wake up and look at their life and think, what the Amanda's natural decision-making process was thinking, something she was really good at and was particularly valued in her professional role. This went some way to explain why she was really struggling with this set of circumstances. They required a large amount of feeling into what was right for her and her offspring. To use a bit of coaching jargon, I prefer to meet a client where they are mentally and emotionally. So we started with logic as outsiders looking in, as it were, creating a pros and cons list, including the financial data. We then stepped inside the decision, aligned the thinking she's done with her values, and felt the emotional impact from all concerned. As you might imagine, Amanda was looking for an impartial sounding board for the choices she was about to make and structure for the conversation she would need to have. We worked together on this and much more. A decision of this complexity and magnitude cannot be taken lightly or quickly. Many of us have probably experienced a friend or colleague who jumps from the frying pan to the fire because they act hastily when no haste was actually called for. So Amanda's dance continues, and she is getting more confident with each new step she takes as each new tune is played. Next, I'll share a little of Frank's dilemma. Frank had been trying to deal with a poor-performing member of their team for some time, but kept getting derailed by their emotions. They were finding it hard to be businesslike in their decision-making, even though they could see it was costing them in a few different ways. Again, meeting Frank where they were, we explored their feelings, and they were able to trace this back to being treated unfairly as a young person, and, they were overcompensating in making sure they didn't do the same to someone else. They were so concerned about the well-being of the individual, but hadn't explored the emotional impact on the other team members or themselves. They realised that when they'd tried to tackle this before, on occasions they'd been using a passive-aggressive approach, hoping the individual would take the carefully dropped hints. They'd chosen this approach in an effort not to upset the team member concerned, but as we all know, this passive-aggressive approach has consequences. We then worked on how to separate their feelings from those of their team member before moving on to examine the data around the poor performance issue. In their position, it was essential for them to be able to look at the commerciality of the situation and make the right decision for all concerned. In Frank's case, there'd been more dancing around the necessary decisive action than dancing with it. Their team had lost trust in their ability to deal with difficult situations, and by extension, they lost credibility as a leader. So this is another example of where the ability to flex and develop competence in both is essential. My final case study for this episode features Andy, a man so driven by data and profit that he was jeopardizing the future of his company. All of his decisions were made quickly based on what the financial data showed him, and none of them based on how the decision impacted his employees. As I started working with Andy, I was reminded by the contrast between his approach and that of Dan Price, the CEO of Gravity, who decided to make the minimum salary for all of his staff $70,000. In order to do that, he had to slash his own salary and take other tough financial action, so this was no easy breezy thing. He was ridiculed at the time, but by 2020, his headcount had doubled and the value of the payments his company processed had gone from $3.8 billion a year to $10.2 billion. Other metrics were equally impressive, including employees paying off debt, becoming homeowners for the first time, and being able to live rather than just survive hand to mouth. As I shared this example with Andy, I watched him pale and then vociferously explain that that wouldn't work in his case. To be clear, I wasn't trying to get Andy to copy Dan's example. That's not why I use story as illustration. I wanted him to see what a decision that included using feelings and empathy could produce. Let's face it, if he was so concerned with financial performance, Dan Price's example was powerful in so many ways. Once Andy had calmed, we were able to start exploring the metrics that he so loved before then stepping into the problem and its related decisions in order to feel the impact on people. As you might imagine, this is work in progress for Andy. We know that old habits die hard, but he now has a process to follow for future decisions. Start with his strongest preference, thinking, then include the feeling aspect. And slow down. Taking more time to use both aspects creates the space for the necessary change and communication processes to be planned. I think it's fair to say that Frank is learning the art of the slow dance. So whether you're an Amanda, a Frank or an Andy, or a combination of all three, you probably recognised yourself in there somewhere. We've heard of examples of where decisions needing to be made involve difficult choices, challenging conversations, and getting people's buy-in, or at least minimising their resistance. Isn't that the dance of life? The dance we can all, if we choose, recognise the tune to and learn some of the basic steps? I've no desire to be a wallflower at the dance of life. My steps won't always be graceful, in time, or even in the right direction, but I'm learning, always learning. And when I dance, I'm free. I've a new mantra now. Alongside done is better than perfect. I'm going to include getting on the floor is better than sitting every dance out. Flourishing is about taking aligned action, so our accomplishments are meaningful as we travel through the peaks and valleys of life. And that requires throwing some shapes unselfconsciously.
If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
You are listening to an Intentional Media Production podcast.